A spiritual twilight was descending upon the land of Israel. In the generations that followed the reign of King Solomon, the people chosen by God had gradually drifted away, losing their memory of him under the corrupting influence of Ahab, a monarch whose wickedness surpassed all who came before him. The sacred soil of the Holy Land was being desecrated, stained red with the blood of blameless prophets who were systematically hunted and silenced by the iron will of his ruthless queen, Jezebel. The people of Israel had turned away from the living God, bowing their knees instead to lifeless idols crafted from wood and stone. Yet, even in this encroaching darkness, God had not forsaken his covenant people. Hidden away in the rugged hills of Gilead, a divine response was being forged. From this overlooked and desolate region, a figure would emerge who was destined to alter the course of history itself. His name was Elijah, a name that echoed with the promise of divine fire and righteous judgment, for it meant, "My God is Yahweh." This is the chronicle of a monumental prophet, a man who would command the heavens to withhold their rain, summon flames directly from the sky, and ultimately depart from this world without ever experiencing death. But this is also a deeply personal account of the man within the prophet, his private anxieties, his crippling uncertainties, and his profound sense of isolation. For Elijah, you see, was a human being, and his most formidable war was not waged against monarchs or their armies. It was an internal struggle against the shadows of his own doubt and the crushing loneliness that hollowed him out until he reached his breaking point. For many long years, Elijah had dwelled in obscurity, concealed amidst the stark and barren mountains. He was not a trained warrior, nor did he belong to the priestly class. His attire consisted of simple garments woven from camel hair. A full beard framed his face, and his eyes glowed with an intensity that seemed to belong to another world. Then, one day, his divine calling was revealed to him. The long season of waiting had concluded. Elijah rose, made his way down from the mountains, and journeyed straight into the epicenter of the nation's decay, the capital city of Samaria, where King Ahab and Jezebel held their court. As he neared the palace gates, the soldiers on duty found themselves frozen, held fast by an invisible force that rendered them motionless, allowing him to pass as if the very atmosphere was clearing a path for him. Unannounced and unescorted, Elijah strode through the corridors of the throne room, causing servants to shrink back with every step he took. The grand columns of the palace, which had stood silent witness to the deference of kings and ambassadors, now beheld a spectacle of a completely different nature. Here was a rugged prophet, bearing no crown and carrying no sword, advancing with a purpose that could only have been instilled by God himself. And there, seated on his throne, was Ahab, enveloped in the emblems of his power, his counselors, his idols, and his vanity. Before the king could even form the question of who this intruder was, Elijah was standing before him, delivering a proclamation that would determine the kingdom's destiny. "As the Lord, the God of Israel, lives, whom I serve," he declared, "there will be no dew or rain in the coming years except by my word." A silence as heavy as a verdict fell over the room. Not a single person dared to inhale. Elijah did not linger for a reply. He spun around and vanished as mysteriously as he had arrived. Ahab remained speechless. He issued no order to seize him, no curse to follow him. He simply sat, paralyzed. And then, the change began. Abruptly, the clouds started to dissipate. The air grew arid. The sky overhead seemed to seal itself shut like a massive door bolted from above. As Elijah made his departure, God's voice came to him once more. "Leave here, Turn eastward and hide in the Kerith ravine, east of the Jordan. You will drink from the brook, and I have directed the ravens to supply you with food there." Elijah obeyed without a moment's pause, venturing east as the land behind him began to parch. The refreshing breezes vanished, and the morning dew that once blessed Israel's fields disappeared. The sun beat down, scorching the ground, and a nation that was once green and bountiful began to wilt. The judgment had commenced, and for 3 entire years, not one drop of rain would grace the earth. While the kingdom descended into drought, Elijah journeyed over hills and through valleys until he located the secluded refuge of Chariot. The brook was a hidden artery of water, carving a scar-like path through the dry hills near the Jordan, winding its way between sun-baked rocks and withered shrubs. In this concealed oasis, deep in the wilderness, Elijah took shelter, and with each dawn and dusk, a quiet miracle took place. At first light, as the eastern sky began to glow, the silence would be broken by the sound of beating wings. Ravens, birds of black plumage, would materialize on the horizon, carrying bread and meat crouched in their beaks. They would land near the prophet, set the provisions before him, and then launch back into the sky, disappearing from sight. According to the law, these were unclean birds, creatures held in contempt by people. Yet they were God's chosen instruments for delivering sustenance, both in the morning and again in the evening, as the setting sun painted the hills in shades of amber. In this profound solitude, Elijah ate his meals and drank from the brook, watching the days bleed into weeks, and the weeks stretch into months. All the while, the drought, like a creeping shadow, extended its reach across all of Israel. Wells turned to dust, fields became barren expanses, livestock collapsed from exhaustion on the cracked, unforgiving ground. From his throne, Ahab bellowed desperate commands to find the man he held responsible for his nation's ruin, but no information ever surfaced. Elijah remained securely hidden by the brook. However, over time, he began to observe a change. The stones that were once covered by the water now stood exposed like small islands in the riverbed. The current, once steady, had dwindled to a mere trickle. The very drought he had announced was now encroaching on his own sanctuary. Then came the morning when he stooped to drink and found nothing but dampness between the rocks. The brook of Cherith had run dry. Yet, Elijah did not give in to panic or complaint. He simply held fast to his faith, waiting. Finally, the clear voice of God spoke. "Go at once to Zarephath in the region of Sidon and stay there. I have directed a widow in that place to supply you with food." The Lord was directing him into perilous lands, to Zarephath, the homeland of the very queen, Jezebel, who had sworn to annihilate all of God's prophets. But Elijah showed no reluctance. He rose, wrapped his cloak securely around himself, and set out on foot. The journey was punishing. The sun was a relentless force, beating down on lifeless fields and skeletal trees. The drought had shown no mercy, and every living thing seemed to be crushed under the weight of the judgment Elijah himself had delivered. When he at last arrived at the gates of Zarephath, he saw her almost immediately. A woman of fragile appearance, clothed in tattered garments, was gathering dry sticks. Her face was etched with fatigue, her hands were chapped, and her eyes carried a look of utter defeat. A deep certainty stirred in his spirit. This was the widow. Elijah drew near, his voice even, and his face weathered from the sun and desert winds. "Would you bring me a little water in a jar so I may have a drink?" he asked. The woman, unaware of his identity, turned to comply. But before she could move away, Elijah added, "And bring me, please, a piece of bread." At this, she paused, her gaze falling to the ground. With a voice that quavered, she responded, "As surely as the Lord your God lives, I don't have any bread, only a handful of flour in a jar and a little olive oil in a jug. I was gathering a few sticks to take home and make a final meal for myself and my son, that we may eat it and then die." In that quiet, heavy moment, a truth more profound than the drought was laid bare. The crisis was not just in the sky above. It had seeped into the human heart, extinguishing all hope. Elijah replied with a gentle tone, "Don't be afraid. Go home and do as you have said, but first make a small loaf of bread for me from what you have and bring it to me, and then make something for yourself and your son. For this is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. The jar of flour will not be used up, and the jug of oil will not run dry until the day the Lord sends rain on the land." The woman simply looked at him, her silence filled with the weight of her choice. Would she hold on to the last bit of sustenance she possessed, or would she release it in an act of trust? She could choose to perish with what little she had, or she could obey and see what would unfold. She made her decision. She placed her faith not in Baal, nor in the idols of her nation, nor in her own survival instincts. She chose to trust the word of a dusty, travel-worn stranger whose eyes held a depth of experience no ordinary man could possess. She went back to her home, kindled a fire, used the flour, mixed in the oil, and baked the bread. When she returned to the jar, the flour remained, and the pitcher of oil was still not empty. That day, the three of them, she, her son, and Elijah, all ate their fill. They ate again the next day, and the day after that, and for many days to come. Then, unexpectedly, the widow's son became gravely ill. It began as a fever, but his breathing soon grew faint, and within hours, the child's life slipped away. The mother collapsed, her spirit shattered. How could it be that the same man who had brought sustenance into her home now seemed to be a harbinger of death? "Did you come here to remind me of my sin?" she wept, her voice choked with anguish. "Did you come only to cause the death of my son?" Elijah offered no immediate answer. He gently lifted the boy's lifeless body into his arms, carried him to the upstairs room where he was staying, and placed him on the bed. Then he cried out to God with all his heart. "Lord my God," Elijah pleaded, "have you brought tragedy even on this widow I am staying with by causing her son to die?" Then he did something unprecedented for a prophet. Elijah stretched himself out over the boy's body 3 times, as if willing his own life force into the child, and begged with desperate urgency, "Lord my God, let this boy's life return to him." A long, heavy, and almost unbearable silence followed. At last, the boy's chest began to rise, his lips parted, and breath flowed back into his body. Elijah carried the living child downstairs and presented him to his mother, saying simply, "Look, your son is alive." In that profound instant, the widow received back more than just her son. She received back her faith. With tears of relief streaming down her face, she declared, "Now I know that you are a man of God, and that the word of the Lord from your mouth is the truth." In a pagan land where altars smoldered for gods of stone and fire, a genuine spark of faith had just been ignited. But the drought persisted. For 3 full years, no rain fell, and God's judgment lay upon Israel like a gaping wound. Livestock perished, wells became pits of dust, and harvests were a distant memory. Initially, hunger afflicted only the poor, but it wasn't long before its grip tightened around the wealthy as well. Yet, amidst this widespread despair, not everyone had bowed to Baal. Among the faithful was Obadiah, the steward of King Ahab's palace. He had seen the king's wickedness up close but had refused to be a passive observer. While Ahab and Jezebel were persecuting and murdering the Lord's prophets, Obadiah did something truly courageous. He concealed 100 of God's prophets in 2 separate caves, 50 in each, and secretly provided them with bread and water. Day after day, he put his own life on the line out of devotion to his God, all while successfully hiding his actions from King Ahab and retaining the king's confidence.
One morning, the king summoned Obadiah with a directive.
Go through the land and search for any patch of grass or spring of water that hasn't dried up. Maybe we can keep the horses and mules alive. Perhaps something has survived. Obadiah set out into the ravaged kingdom, traversing barren fields, when he suddenly saw a figure. Standing there on the dusty road was Elijah, tall, resolute, his eyes burning with an ancient intensity. Obadiah immediately fell to the ground, crying out, "Is it really you, my lord Elijah?" "It is," the prophet confirmed. "Go, tell your master, Elijah is here." Obadiah slowly got to his feet, fear gripping him. His eyes conveyed his profound distress. "What have I done to you, that you would hand your servant over to Ahab to be killed? If I go and tell Ahab you are here, and then the Spirit of the Lord carries you off to some unknown place, he will execute me when he cannot find you."
Obadiah then leaned in, sharing his secret with Elijah.
"I, your servant, have worshipped the Lord since my youth. When Jezebel was killing off the Lord's prophets, I hid 100 of them in caves and supplied them with food. I have done all I can, Elijah, and now you ask me to do this?" But Elijah's resolve was unwavering. "As the Lord Almighty lives, whom I serve, I will surely present myself to Ahab today." Obadiah recognized he was in the presence of a man whose words carried the weight of heaven, and so he complied. With his heart pounding, he went back to the palace and delivered the news no one had expected. Elijah had come back. The prophet who had sealed the skies, who had humbled the king on his own throne and then vanished, had finally reappeared. Without a moment of hesitation, Ahab mounted his chariot and rode out to the meeting place.
The sun glared down on the parched, empty fields as the two men came face to face. It was Ahab who spoke first, his voice dripping with contempt. "Is that you, you troubler of Israel?" But Elijah met his stare without flinching and answered firmly, "I have not made trouble for Israel, but you and your father's family have. You have abandoned the Lord's commands and have followed the Baals." Then Elijah laid down his audacious challenge. "Now summon the people from all over Israel to meet me on Mount Carmel, and bring the 450 prophets of Baal and the 400 prophets of Asherah, who eat at Jezebel's table. Today, we will settle the question of who is truly God." Ahab accepted the challenge, and the stage for the great confrontation was set. Word of the contest spread like wildfire across Israel, and thousands of people made the ascent to Mount Carmel from every part of the land. There were elders and young people, priests and soldiers, farmers and shepherds. No one was willing to miss the event that was about to unfold. At the summit, the atmosphere was thick with tension. On one side stood nearly 1,000 prophets of Baal and Asherah, arrayed in their ostentatious robes and adorned with pagan emblems. On the other side, Elijah stood alone, his cloak worn from years of exposure to the sun and wind. The prophet then raised his voice, his words carrying a tone of deep sorrow as he addressed the assembly. "How long will you waver between two opinions? If the Lord is God, follow him. But if Baal is God, follow him." The crowd remained utterly silent, as if their collective shame had rendered them speechless.
Elijah then stepped forward to lay out the terms of the contest.
I am the only one of the Lord's prophets left, but Baal has 450 prophets. Get 2 bulls for us. Let Baal's prophets choose one for themselves, and let them cut it into pieces and put it on the wood but not set fire to it. I will prepare the other bull and put it on the wood but not set fire to it. Then you call on the name of your God, and I will call on the name of the Lord. The God who answers by fire, he is God. The prophets of Baal took their turn first. They prepared their altar, slaughtered their bull, and arranged it on the dry wood. What followed was a disturbing display. From morning until noon, the 450 prophets shouted, leaped, and danced in a frenzy around their altar, crying out to Baal. But no response came, not the faintest sign. Baal was completely, embarrassingly silent. As the sun reached its zenith, Elijah, who had been watching the pathetic spectacle, began to taunt them. Shout louder, he suggested with sarcasm. Perhaps he is deep in thought, or busy, or traveling. Maybe he is sleeping and must be awakened. In a state of crazed desperation, they shrieked even louder and escalated their grim ritual by gashing themselves with swords and spears until their blood flowed. The afternoon wore on, but still no answer came. No fire fell. Murmurs began to spread through the crowd as Baal's impotence was exposed before all of Israel. Now, it was Elijah's turn. The people, weary and disheartened, gathered closely around him. In silence, Elijah took 12 stones, one for each of the tribes of Israel, and he rebuilt the Lord's altar, which had been torn down. He carefully arranged the wood on the altar and placed the pieces of the bull on it. Then, he made a seemingly impossible request in the middle of a severe drought, instructing the people to fill 4 large jars with water and pour it on the offering. They did this once, then a second time, and finally a third time, until the offering and the wood were completely drenched, and the water filled the trench he had dug around the altar. Then, standing before everyone, the prophet lifted his gaze to the heavens and prayed aloud, Lord, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, let it be known today that you are God in Israel, and that I am your servant, and have done all these things at your command. Answer me, Lord, answer me, so these people will know that you, Lord, are God, and that you are turning their hearts back again. A short but profound silence followed his prayer. Suddenly, a brilliant fire descended from the sky. It was a scorching, living flame that instantly incinerated the sacrifice, the wood, the stones, and even the water in the trench, leaving nothing behind but dust and a stunned, reverent silence. The people fell to their knees, acknowledging the one true God and crying out in awe, "The Lord, He is God! The Lord, He is God!" In that moment, all doubt was erased. Yahweh had answered, not Baal. Elijah's spiritual authority was affirmed beyond question, and the crowd finally grasped that the drought was a direct result of their having abandoned the Lord. The truth had never shone more brightly than it did on Mount Carmel. The prophet then looked toward Baal's false prophets, whose pride now lay in ashes, and he commanded that they be seized. They were taken down to the Kishon Valley, where the judgment prescribed by God in ancient times was executed. The elimination of all who had led Israel into the worship of false gods. At last, the land of Israel was beginning to be cleansed. As the people witnessed this pivotal moment, Elijah sensed something stirring in his spirit that he hadn't felt in 3 years. The distant whisper of rain approaching. It was a sound no one else could perceive yet, but the prophet recognized it as a promise that would soon be evident to all.
With newfound authority, the prophet addressed King Ahab directly. "Go, eat and drink, for there is the sound of a heavy rain." Ahab looked up at a sky that was as clear and dry as it had been for the past 3 years. Nevertheless, he obeyed. The drought had accomplished its purpose. God was now prepared to open the heavens once more and pour out his mercy.
Elijah then climbed back to the top of the mountain and began to pray with intense fervor, with the unwavering faith of one who intimately knows the God he serves. His servant stood nearby, waiting for his command. "Go and look toward the sea," Elijah instructed. The young man ran, scanned the horizon, and returned, reporting breathlessly, "There is nothing there." Elijah remained in his posture of prayer and said with firm conviction, "Go back 7 times." The servant went a second time and still saw nothing. He went a third time and a fourth. 6 times he came back with the same report, "I see nothing, sir." But Elijah refused to give up. He continued to pour out his heart, certain that God's work was not yet complete. On the 7th attempt, the young servant ran back, his voice filled with excitement and wonder, exclaiming, "A cloud as small as a man's hand is rising from the sea." For Elijah, that was all the confirmation he needed. He quickly stood up and gave an urgent command. "Go and tell Ahab, hitch up your chariot and go down before the rain stops you." Within just a few minutes, that tiny cloud expanded. The sky rapidly darkened, and a powerful wind swept in from the horizon. The people looked up in amazement. After 3 long years, heavy drops of rain began to fall on the thirsty ground. Soon, the gentle shower intensified into a torrential downpour, drenching the parched earth and creating new streams that rushed through the cracked, barren land. Ahab swiftly mounted his chariot and headed toward Jezreel, urged on by the deluge that was now saturating the landscape. But then, an extraordinary event took place. The power of the Lord came upon Elijah. The prophet tucked his cloak into his belt and began to run, not with the speed of an ordinary man, but with supernatural velocity, propelled by the very might of God. Before the king's astonished eyes, the prophet outpaced the horses, running through the storm as if he were being carried by the wind itself. It was a breathtaking display of power. The man who had shut the heavens was now running ahead of the king, demonstrating unequivocally who held true authority over Israel. It was not Ahab, nor Jezebel, nor Baal, but Yahweh, the living God, who commands both the rains and the seasons. Yet this rainfall represented more than just water. It was a powerful lesson. God responds to those who pray with persistence. He did not answer on Elijah's first try, nor his second, nor even his 6th. God's response came only after Elijah continued to pray in faith, trusting completely in the promise he had been given. The drought was finally over, and the people were receiving the mercy they had long hoped for. But the greater battle was far from finished. Even as the rain fell in abundance on Israel, an enraged woman was seething within the palace, unknowingly preparing Elijah for the most severe test of his life. Inside the palace at Jezreel, Jezebel heard the news. Elijah had triumphed over her prophets, executed her priests, and now the people were beginning to turn against her. Her face contorted with rage. She dispatched a messenger to find the prophet, carrying a threat that was far more than a simple warning. It was a vow of death. "May the gods deal with me, be it ever so severely, if by this time tomorrow I do not make your life like that of one of them." When Elijah received this message, a fear colder and deeper than any he had ever experienced seized his heart. The same prophet who had stood fearlessly before hundreds on Mount Carmel and called down fire from heaven now found himself trembling at the wrath of a single woman. Acting on pure instinct, without seeking God's guidance, he fled for his life. He ran southward, leaving behind the very people who were just beginning to turn back to God. He abandoned his divine mission, completely blinded by his fear. He traveled through fields and over mountains, never pausing, never looking back, like a man being chased by death itself. Finally, he arrived in the wilderness, alone and utterly spent. There, under the meager shade of a broom bush, the prophet collapsed. With tears he could no longer suppress, he cried out in bitterness to heaven, "I have had enough, Lord. Take my life. I am no better than my ancestors." These words erupted from the deepest core of his being. Elijah, the great prophet, had hit his lowest point. All his strength, his faith, and his courage seemed to have vanished under the relentless desert sun. And there, in the sparse shade, his only wish was to close his eyes and never wake up. It wasn't just Jezebel's threat that had shattered him. It was the unbearable weight of his loneliness, the heavy burden of feeling that he was the only faithful one left, and the profound disappointment that, after all he had endured, it seemed nothing had truly changed. Yet, there in the wilderness, in the darkest moment of his existence, God did not forsake him. Suddenly, a gentle hand touched him. Elijah slowly opened his weary eyes and saw an angel beside him, who spoke with a voice both tender and firm. "Get up and eat." Elijah looked, and there by his head was a loaf of bread, baked over hot coals, and a jar of water. He ate and drank, but the heaviness in his spirit remained. He drifted back to sleep, hoping to escape his pain. But the angel returned, patiently and compassionately touching him again, and saying in that same calm but firm voice, "Get up and eat, for the journey is too much for you." These words resonated deep within Elijah's exhausted heart. The prophet who had fled in desperation was now being prepared for a more intimate and profound encounter with God. There, on that holy mountain, in the same place where centuries before God had spoken with Moses, Elijah was about to learn something new. For Elijah was human, deeply and profoundly human. Even though God had used him to perform incredible miracles, and though he had seen impossible things, he was now confronting a reality that was much harder to face. His own frailty, his own humanity. And in the midst of that brokenness, God extended his mercy. Because even God's chosen people get tired, they suffer, and they doubt. Under that broom bush, Elijah began to understand that God doesn't only use those who are strong. He lifts up those who are broken. For it is in our moments of deepest weakness that God's greatest work can begin. That meal provided Elijah with a strength he couldn't explain. He stood up and began the journey to Horeb. Sustained by that divine nourishment, he traveled for 40 days and 40 nights, across the scorching desert until he reached Horeb, the mountain of God, where he would meet with him face to face. Elijah arrived at Mount Horeb, the sacred peak where, centuries earlier, God had given Moses the tablets of the law. Now, drained and defeated, Elijah sought refuge from the biting wind inside a dark cave. And there, in the profound quiet of that place, God's voice came to him directly. "What are you doing here, Elijah?" With his face still clouded by sorrow, the prophet answered from the depths of his wounded spirit, "I have been very zealous for the Lord God Almighty. The Israelites have rejected your covenant, torn down your altars, and put your prophets to death with the sword. I am the only one left, and now they are trying to kill me too." Elijah's voice was fragile and tired, like that of a man who had fought alone for too long. But God's response was not one of rebuke. He simply invited him to come out of the cave and stand on the mountain,
for the Lord himself was about to pass by.
Suddenly, a tremendous wind arose, so powerful that it shattered the rocks and shook the entire mountain. Elijah pressed himself against the stone walls, but the Lord was not in the violent wind. After the wind came an earthquake, shaking the very ground beneath his feet. But the Lord was not in the earthquake. Following the earthquake, a blazing fire erupted, illuminating the mountain with its searing intensity. But the Lord was not in the fire either. And then a stillness descended. An absolute silence enveloped the mountain. From within that silence emerged something entirely different. A gentle whisper, so soft it was barely audible, like a light breeze brushing against the skin. Upon hearing that quiet sound, Elijah knew God was present. He covered his face with his cloak, moved slowly out of the cave, and stood at its entrance. In that gentle whisper was the same powerful voice that had spoken the universe into existence. But now it spoke with the tenderness of a father comforting his exhausted child. With infinite patience, God asked him again, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" The prophet repeated his lament, yet this time, hearing the heavenly whisper, something within him began to mend. God did not condemn him or turn him away. Instead, he gave him a new mission. He spoke with renewed clarity and authority. "Go back the way you came. You are to anoint Hazael king over Aram, Jehu king over Israel, and Elisha to succeed you as prophet." Then he revealed something profound, something Elijah had not known. "Yet I reserve 7,000 in Israel, all whose knees have not bowed down to Baal, and whose mouths have not kissed him." As he heard these words, the prophet's heart began to beat with renewed strength. He was not alone. He had never been alone. God had preserved a faithful remnant, hidden and protected, awaiting the right moment to be revealed. His ministry, his purpose, it had not been for nothing. Elijah descended from Mount Horeb with a restored heart and a clear sense of direction. He was no longer the man who had pleaded for death under the broom tree. He now walked with a steady stride, understanding that his story was not over and he would not have to finish it by himself. God had given him specific instructions, who to anoint and who to prepare. Among those names, one held a special significance: Elisha, son of Shaphat. And so he journeyed to the fields where Elisha was engaged in his work. Elisha was not a priest or a prophet. He was a farmer. He was plowing a field with 12 yoke of oxen, personally guiding the 12th pair. His hands were calloused from his labor, his cloak was dusty, and his back was bent from his daily work. But God had taken notice of him. Elijah approached him without a word, took off his own cloak and draped it over Elisha's shoulders. This simple act was laden with meaning. It was the clear symbol of a divine summons, the transfer of a sacred purpose, and the start of a new life. Elisha stopped in his tracks. He felt the weight of the cloak upon him and immediately grasped its significance. In that single moment, he knew his entire life had just been redirected. He ran after Elijah with one final request. "Let me kiss my father and mother goodbye," he asked, "and then I will come with you." Without showing emotion or applying pressure, Elijah replied, "Go back." "What have I done to you?" Then, Elisha did something radical. He returned to the field, but not to resume his old life. He took the yoke of oxen he had been working with and slaughtered them. He then used the wooden plow and the other tools of his former trade to build a fire. On this impromptu altar, he cooked the meat and distributed it among the people of his village. He had set fire to his past. He left himself nothing to which he could return, no excuses, no safety net. He abandoned everything and followed Elijah.
And from that day on, Elisha became his devoted assistant. Years went by after the fire on Mount Carmel, and the people of Israel seemed to have forgotten the powerful lesson. The nation slipped back into its old patterns, and Ahab, though he had witnessed God's power firsthand, continued to reign as if nothing had occurred.
He remained an indecisive king, manipulated by the ruthless will of Jezebel.
Having provided a final feast for
In
his household,
Samaria,
Elisha
Ahab
turned
possessed
his back on his
everything a
work.
king could desire: palaces, gardens, wealth, and servants. Yet his heart was consumed by a desire for something more. Adjacent to his palace was a vineyard belonging to a righteous man named Naboth. It wasn't a grand or opulent vineyard, but it was his ancestral inheritance. Ahab coveted it from the moment he laid eyes on it. He approached Naboth with a disingenuous smile, offering to buy it or trade it for an even better vineyard. But Naboth firmly declined, stating, "The Lord forbid that I should give you the inheritance of my ancestors." Ahab went back to his palace, behaving like a petulant child. He threw himself on his bed, faced the wall, and refused to eat. His greed had wounded his pride, and his weakness festered into bitterness. When Jezebel observed his sullen state, she asked him contemptuously, "Is this how you act as king over Israel? Get up and eat. Cheer up. I'll get you the vineyard of Naboth." And she did exactly that. With cold-blooded cruelty, she forged letters in the king's name, sealed them with his royal seal, declared a public fast, and had Naboth seated in a prominent position. But seated next to him were two scoundrels who, before the entire assembly, leveled a false accusation. Naboth has cursed both God and the king. Without any trial or opportunity for defense, Naboth was dragged out of the city and stoned to death. His only crime was defending what was rightfully his. When the news was brought to Jezebel, she smiled with satisfaction and told Ahab, "Get up and take possession of the vineyard. Naboth is no longer alive." Ahab went to survey his newly acquired property, as pleased as a child with a new toy, thinking he had won. But as he walked among the vines, Elijah suddenly materialized before him, his face a mask of judgment. The king recoiled at the sight of him and asked, "So you have found me, my enemy?" Elijah replied without a trace of hesitation, "I have found you because you have sold yourself to do evil in the eyes of the Lord." And once again, Elijah delivered a divine verdict proclaiming, "This is what the Lord says. In the place where dogs licked up Naboth's blood, dogs will lick up your blood. Yes, yours. I am going to bring disaster on you. I will wipe out your descendants and cut off from Ahab every last male in Israel. Your wife Jezebel will be devoured by dogs by the wall of Jezreel. Dogs will eat those belonging to your family who die in the city, and the birds will feed on those who die in the country." Ahab's face turned ashen. For the first time, Elijah's voice did not sound like that of an enemy, but of a judge. And this time, Ahab did not lash out or call for his soldiers. He tore his clothes, put on sackcloth, and began to fast, lying in silence and refusing food. He walked about meekly with his head bowed. From heaven, God saw this display of remorse and spoke to Elijah again, saying, "Because he has humbled himself, I will not bring this disaster in his day, but I will bring it on his house in the days of his son." Ahab had been warned. He would ultimately pay the price for the idolatry and corruption he had sown throughout Israel. Yet, years passed, and Ahab may have thought God had forgotten the judgment. He was wrong. He decided to go to war to recapture the city of Ramoth Gilead from Aram. Despite a prophet's warning that he would die, Ahab ignored God's message. He went into battle in disguise, thinking he could cheat fate. But a randomly fired arrow found a gap in his armor, striking him at his most vulnerable point. As the battle continued, Ahab bled out in his chariot, dying at sunset. And when his chariot was washed, dogs came and licked up his blood, just as Elijah had foretold. That is how Ahab, the most wicked king Israel had ever seen, met his end. His son Ahaziah succeeded him on the throne. It did not take long for Ahaziah to follow the corrupt example set by his parents. One day, Ahaziah fell through the lattice of an upper room in his palace in Samaria and was seriously injured. Bedridden and desperate, the young king made a decision that would seal his doom. Instead of turning to the God of Israel, he sent messengers to Ekron, a Philistine city, to consult Baal-zebub, the pagan god of flies.
But God saw this act of defiance and instructed Elijah, "Go up and meet the messengers of the king of Samaria and ask them, is it because there is no God in Israel that you are going off to consult Baal-zebub, the god of Ekron? Therefore this is what the Lord says, you will not leave the bed you are lying on. You will certainly die." Elijah obeyed, and the message was quickly relayed back to the palace. Startled, Ahaziah asked his messengers, "What kind of man was it who came to meet you?" They replied, "He was a man with a garment of hair and with a leather belt around his waist." Ahaziah knew at once it was Elijah the Tishbite. The king's fury ignited, and he dispatched a captain with 50 soldiers to apprehend him. They found the prophet sitting calmly on top of a hill, and the captain arrogantly shouted, "Man of God, the king says, come down."
But Elijah answered serenely, "If I am a man of God, may fire come down from heaven and consume you and your 50 men." And in that instant, it happened. A roar split the heavens, and flames descended, consuming the captain and his soldiers. Their cries vanished, leaving only ashes. Ahaziah, stubborn in his rebellion, sent another captain with another 50 men. The outcome was identical: fire, judgment, and death. The third captain, however, was different. He did not approach with commands or threats. He fell on his knees, raised his hands, and pleaded, "Man of God, please have respect for my life and the lives of these 50 men, your servants." This time, the voice of God spoke to Elijah, "Go down with him. Do not be afraid of him." The prophet rose and accompanied the third captain to the palace. With great authority, he stood at Ahaziah's bedside and reaffirmed the divine decree.
"This is what the Lord says. Because you sent messengers to consult Baal-zebub, as if there were no God in Israel to inquire of, you will not leave the bed you are lying on. You will certainly die." And so it happened. Ahaziah died, just as the word of the Lord spoken through his prophet had declared. With his death, another link in Ahab's dynasty fell under the full weight of God's judgment. Ahaziah left no son to inherit his throne, and the house of Ahab began to crumble like a wall with a fractured foundation. Yet, even as judgment was playing out within the palace, something sacred was stirring on the roads of Israel. For Elijah himself was now preparing for his own departure, not into death, but into eternity. Elijah knew his time had come. His spirit, finely tuned by years of listening to God's voice, perceived it with perfect clarity.
His work on earth was done, but his departure would not be a quiet one, nor would he experience it alone. From Gilgal, the prophet embarked on his final journey. Elijah rose early that morning. The desert air felt unusually gentle, and the sun was just beginning to rise. But Elijah was already on his way. Walking beside him was Elisha, his student and successor, the young man who had forsaken everything to follow him and had not left his side since that day. At each stage of the journey,
Elijah seemed to be testing Elisha's commitment. When they arrived at the gateway to the promised land, Elijah said to him, "Stay here, Elisha. The Lord has sent me to Bethel." But Elisha's response was immediate. "As surely as the Lord lives and as you live, I will not leave you." And so they continued on together. In Bethel, a company of prophets came out to meet them.
They took Elisha aside and asked him quietly, "Do you know that the Lord is going to take your master from you today?" Elisha simply affirmed, "Yes, I know, but do not speak of it." They journeyed on, and again Elijah said, "Stay here, for the Lord has sent me to Jericho." But Elisha's reply was unchanged. He refused to be separated from him. So they came to Jericho, the city of ancient miracles and fallen walls. Here too, a company of prophets approached Elisha and gave him the same solemn warning. But Elisha, his heart heavy with sorrow, answered once more, "Yes, I know. Be silent." At last they came to the Jordan, the sacred river that served as a boundary between the earthly and the divine. 50 other prophets watched from a distance, serving as witnesses to a moment that would be remembered forever. Then Elijah took his cloak, rolled it into a bundle, and struck the surface of the water. Immediately, the river parted, just as it had in the days of Moses. The currents receded to the left and to the right, creating a dry path for the two men to walk across. At that point, Elijah paused. He knew his journey was nearing its conclusion, but he could not leave without securing his legacy. He turned to Elisha and said with great solemnity, "Tell me, what can I do for you before I am taken from you?" Without a moment's hesitation, Elisha made a bold and seemingly impossible request. "Let me inherit a double portion of your spirit." Elijah looked at him intently, understanding the audacity, the faith, and the immense responsibility contained in such a plea. "You have asked a difficult thing," he replied. "Yet, if you see me when I am taken from you, it will be yours." They walked on together in silence. As the sun began to set, the heavens suddenly tore open. A whirlwind descended from the sky, sending sand swirling and winds roaring with an otherworldly force. And then an astonishing sight appeared. A chariot of fire, drawn by horses of fire, came down like a blazing arrow from above. With a powerful gust, the whirlwind swept Elijah upward, enfolded in fire and embraced by glory. Elisha cried out with the anguish of a son, "My father, my father, the chariots and horsemen of Israel!" But there was no one there. Elijah had been taken into heaven, having never known death. His cloak slowly floated down to the earth, gently settling on the ground. Elisha picked it up, his hands trembling, his life forever altered. It was a tangible sign, a confirmation that the spirit that had empowered the fiery prophet now rested upon him. He went back to the Jordan, the same river they had just crossed. Striking the water with his master's cloak, he called out, "Where now is the Lord, the God of Elijah?" And once again, the Jordan parted. The watching prophets bowed low in reverence. They no longer saw Elisha as a mere apprentice, for it was clear that the spirit of Elijah was now upon him. Elijah had ascended, but his fire had not been extinguished. It had simply been passed to another. That day, at the banks of the Jordan, the prophetic legacy continued. Though Elijah was gone, his work remained. God had not forgotten his promise of judgment against the house of Ahab, nor the innocent blood spilled in Naboth's vineyard. Now, in the time of Elisha, that promise was about to be fulfilled with relentless force. The judgment was already in motion. When the time was right, God raised up Jehu, a commander in Israel's army, a fierce, resolute, and fearless warrior. The Lord then spoke through Elisha, providing clear directives. He sent a young prophet to the military camp where Jehu was. The prophet poured oil on Jehu's head and declared, "This is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. I anoint you king over the Lord's people, over Israel. You are to destroy the house of Ahab your master, and I will avenge the blood of my servants the prophets. The whole house of Ahab will perish. I will cut off from Ahab every last male. As for Jezebel, dogs will devour her on the plot of ground at Jezreel, and no one will bury her." Before Jehu could even respond, the young prophet was gone, vanishing like a whisper. Jehu walked back to his officers, his head still wet with oil and a new fire blazing in his eyes. His companions looked at him, curious.
"What did that madman want? What did he say to you?" Jehu hesitated for a moment, but then, looking them squarely in the eye, he stated boldly, "He anointed me king over Israel." Instantly, they all rose, each man spreading his cloak on the steps beneath Jehu's feet as a symbol of their loyalty. They blew their trumpets and shouted, "Jehu is king!" In that moment, the revolution began. Jehu immediately leaped into his war chariot and sped toward Jezreel like a storm. His first destination was the field of Naboth, the very land Jezebel had stolen through murder to give to her husband. There, he encountered Joram, Ahab's second son and the current king of Israel, along with Ahaziah, king of Judah, who was visiting. Without hesitating, Jehu drew his bow and shot an arrow that pierced Joram's heart, declaring, "Here on Naboth's own land, the Lord is repaying you."
The king's body fell on the very spot where Naboth had been killed. Ahaziah attempted to flee but did not get far. He was struck down by Jehu's men and died at Megiddo. The prophecy was being fulfilled in every detail, but justice was not yet complete. One name remained: Jezebel. The queen was in her palace at Jezreel. When she heard that Jehu was approaching, she prepared herself. She painted her eyes, arranged her hair, and watched from a window as Jehu's chariot drew near. "Have you come in peace, you Zimri, you murderer of your master?" she taunted, yelling from her high window. Jehu looked up and called out, "Who is on my side? Who?" 2 or 3 officials appeared at the window, and Jehu commanded them, "Throw her down." So they pushed her from the window. Jezebel's body plummeted to the ground below. Her blood splattered on the walls and the horses trampled her remains. Later, Jehu gave an order for her to be buried, but when his men went to find her body, there was almost nothing left. Only her skull, her feet, and the palms of her hands remained. The dogs had devoured her, precisely as Elijah had prophesied. And so, the word of the Lord was fulfilled. The household of Ahab was utterly annihilated. His children, his associates, and his priests all fell to Jehu's sword as he carried out the divine judgment. But Jehu wasn't finished. One by one, each of Ahab's descendants was executed. All 70 were beheaded. Next came the servants, the counselors, the false prophets, and anyone with a connection to the throne in Samaria. In a single, decisive campaign, Jehu completely erased the house of Ahab from existence. Every word of God's judgment was carried out to the letter. The blood of the prophets was finally avenged, and Elijah's legacy, even after his ascension to heaven, continued to burn like a cleansing fire across the land. For although Elijah's physical presence no longer walked the earth, his spirit had not departed. Centuries later, a new prophecy would emerge from the lips of Malachi, the last prophet before a long silence. "See, I will send the prophet Elijah to you before that great and dreadful day of the Lord comes. He will turn the hearts of the parents to their children, and the hearts of the children to their parents. Or else I will come and strike the land with total destruction."
He was not speaking of the Elijah of the past, but of an Elijah who was yet to come, of a prophetic spirit that would once again awaken slumbering hearts, call for truth in an age of complacency, and prepare the way for both judgment and restoration.
It was a declaration made before the final chapter. Elijah would return before the glorious and terrifying day of the Lord. A voice like his, a calling like his, would be heard again. This was not just a promise, it was also a warning. It means the story of Elijah, the prophet who never died, is still unfolding. According to Scripture, he will come again, and when he does, the world must be ready. From Elijah, we learn that God also walks with us and supports us when we feel broken. We learn that even the most courageous can fall, that even the most devoted servants can experience fear, and that even prophets can feel isolated, empty, and on the verge of giving up. And now, this story is speaking to you. Yes, you. Perhaps you have been on a journey through doubt, fear, or moments of deep spiritual fatigue. Have you ever felt that the struggle is overwhelming? That you are all alone and the world around you has forgotten God? Maybe, like Elijah, you have felt the desire to hide away and wish for it all to be over. Listen closely. God is not finished with you. When Elijah was completely spent and had no strength left, God did not abandon him or scold him for his weakness. Instead, he nourished him, comforted him, and strengthened him. And after that, he spoke to him again. Perhaps you find yourself in that very place right now, wounded and weary. Today, God is extending his call to you. Because if there is one thing we can learn from Elijah, it is that God does not choose the perfect. He chooses the willing, those who are ready to listen in faith. If you know someone who needs to hear this message, someone who is wrestling with doubt or feeling alone, consider sharing this with them. It might be precisely what they need to hear today. Please support this work by giving it a like. And don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss more of these life-changing stories from the Bible. Blessings to you and your family.